Welcome in to Candlestick Chronicles, a 49ers podcast on the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Chris Biederman. I'm riding solo tonight. No Kyle Madsen tonight because he is doing post game for 95.7. So if you would prefer to go support Kyle and listen to the post game show on 95.7 The Game in San Francisco, go ahead and do that. If you want to rock with me, the more the merrier. We are live on our YouTube channel. If you're listening to this on the audio version on Tuesday, please go to YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, we are sponsored by Lamb Chops. It is the official clothing provider of the Candlestick Chronicles podcast. Lamb Chops was in the building. Heard it was well represented at Levi's Stadium tonight as the 49ers beat down the New York Jets. I think beat down is pretty appropriate way to say that. 32-19 on Monday Night Football. But Lamb Chops, I'm wearing a pair of mesh shorts. They have these are beach themed mesh shorts, incredibly comfortable, warm for the entire game. Watching from home, go to sglambchops.com. Use promo code Candlestick20 to save 20% on your order. We are also happy to announce that Cooperage Brewing is back as a title sponsor of Candlestick Chronicles, and better yet, the Candlestick Chronicles Hazy IPA is back, available at Cooperage, wherever you get your Cooperage craft beer. It is delicious. It's obviously, if you've seen the can, it's probably the coolest can if you're a 49ers fan that you could possibly buy. But the beer is absolutely delicious, and I'm not just saying that because they sponsor the podcast and it's named after our podcast. It is legitimately great beer. You've heard me say it. All the great beer in Sonoma County, I would put Cooperage up with anything, and obviously in terms of hazy IPAs, I would put Candlestick Chronicles up against anything. That includes some of the big names you hear out of the North Bay. So if you know, you know. Shout out to Cooperage for sponsoring the podcast again. Another announcement: we are having a live Candlestick Chronicles event at Cooperage on October 12th, Saturday, October 12th in Santa Rosa. So we'll be having more information available about that live event as it becomes available. But October 12th, 8 p.m., we're going to do a live stage show. Kyle and I, maybe some special guests, maybe some fundraising, maybe some other things in the works as we speak. So go to cooperage.com. You can order beer from there. Or cooperagebrewing.com, excuse me. Order beer from there. They'll deliver straight to your door if you're 21 or older within the state of California. Bring some Candlestick Chronicles to your tailgate and be the envy of basically everybody at your tailgate. We are also sponsored by Prize Picks. Use promo code Candlestick to match your first bet deposit up to $100. You know what it is with Prize Picks. Promo code Candlestick to match your first deposit up to $100. Let's get to the podcast because we have a lot to talk about coming off the 49ers 32-19 win against the New York Jets on Monday Night Football to open the season 1-0. Let's go. All right, so no Kyle. I'm riding solo. I've been known to do a solo podcast now and again. These primetime games make the schedule a little bit difficult, particularly when Kyle has to do post game for 95.7 over in the Bay Area. So shout out to him. That's a really cool opportunity that he's getting, and it's not going to stop us from going live. Feel free to interact. Feel free to interact in the comments section. Greg Hammond asks, "Hey Chris, can you answer when did Jordan Mason know he was going to start?" That is an interesting discussion. I don't know if anybody saw Jordan Mason's post-game press conference, which was after the ESPN live interview he did on the field after the game. Mason said on ESPN, he told Lisa Salters that he knew he was going to start on Friday. Kyle Shanahan in his post-game press conference said he wasn't sure Mason was going to start until Monday. And when Mason went to the podium post-game, he didn't seem very happy. If I'm reading between the lines here, it looked like somebody had given him a firm talking to that kind of, look from the outside looking in, it looked like it kind of took the joy out from the experience of having a first NFL start and 147 yards and a touchdown on 28 carries on Monday Night Football, helping a Super Bowl contending team get to 1-0. So that was kind of a weird situation. We'll talk more about the Christian McCaffrey getting scratched with calf injury and an Achilles issue. later on. But first, I think it's important that we just talk about, the 49ers getting back to bully ball. It felt kind of like a Jim Harbaugh type win for the Niners. It wasn't the Kyle Shanahan offense that we're used to in the sense of, oh, big explosive plays to George Kittle, big explosive plays to Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel with the 60-yard touchdown. There were elements of that for sure, but it was much more of the type of game that the 49ers had to grind out. And yeah, they scored on, what was it? 6, 7, 8 straight possessions in the middle of the game. They went 3 and out in their first possession, and then they kneeled out the clock as the game ended. In between, they scored on every single drive. They went field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, field goal, field goal, field goal. Scored at 32 points. Jake Moody kicked 6 field goals. I'm sure the offensive players and Kyle Shanahan himself will tell you they don't love the fact that they didn't finish more of those drives with touchdowns, which is a fair critique, I think. But when you score 32 points and win any game by double digits, you're going to be pretty happy about it. And, the Jets had that last touchdown that sort of served as window dressing. It wasn't as close as 32-19 might indicate. So what was bully ball? Like Kyle Shanahan, he always talks about wanting to run the ball effectively and get to 30 carries. It's a team-wide goal, he always says. The Niners ran 38 times for 180 yards, 4.7 a clip, without Christian McCaffrey. That's kind of wild to think about. Without Christian McCaffrey. I thought the Niners offensive line did a really good job. The Jets defensive line with Quinnen Williams, Javon Kinlaw did not seem like Javon Kinlaw had a particularly great game given the production the 49ers had running between the tackles and at him in a number of instances. The Niners played ahead of the sticks because of what Jordan Mason was able to do. They didn't turn the ball over. They won the turnover battle 2-0. And obviously that was important as the game went on. So it wasn't perfect. In fact, in the first quarter, it felt downright uncomfortable because early in the game, you had the Packers take the 7-6 lead. You had, Fred Warner force a fumble. It felt like the 49ers would get some momentum early in that game, and the 49ers couldn't get a first down after Warner forced that fumble, and they end up kicking a field goal there. That felt a little bit deflating watching from home on my couch. And then as the game went on, it just sort of became apparent despite that drive where they were just hitting Garrett Wilson on every third down. I think Garrett Wilson had third down conversions on 3 straight attempts, right? I think it was 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, and 3rd and 6. And then they get the touchdown. Aside from that, the defense was pretty suffocating. But again, like Kyle Shanahan's offense didn't quite look like Kyle Shanahan's offense because it wasn't the array of explosive plays and yards after the catch and all of that. It was sort of that grinded out. It was sort of similar defensively because they had to win in ways that are different than we've seen the 49ers win before. Right? Like we're used to, a prototypical 49ers win under Kyle Shanahan is they get up by double digits or 2 scores. They score before halftime and then get the ball after the first half and then score again, and then the defense pins its ears back and you see Nick Bosa get a sack or 2, or you see Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner, some of those guys be able to get after the passer with the pass rush because these are obvious passing downs, right? The 49ers only had 1 sack despite being up big for the vast majority of the game, particularly in the second half. But I think like we predicted going into the season, the secondary was lights out. And I think it's harder to appreciate that while you're watching on the TV copy, obviously, because you don't see what's happening with the secondary on every single play. But I think it's fair to suspect that maybe the Niners defense this time is going to be carried by its secondary more so than the pass rush. And that's not to say the defensive line played bad, because one thing the Niners did really, really well was make the Jets one-dimensional. The Jets only had 3.5 yards per carry. They had 68 yards on 19 attempts. Breece Hall, 3.4 yards per carry. The top running back in a ton of guys' fantasy drafts, right? A lot of people thought he would be the best running back in the league, and he still might be. But the 49ers defense did a really great job of forcing the Jets to be one-dimensional. And the Niners essentially played the type of game that the Jets wanted to play. The Niners were just better at it. The Niners were able to run the ball and they were able to stop the run. And the Jets couldn't run the ball and they couldn't stop the run. And it prevented Aaron Rodgers from really ever getting into a rhythm in any meaningful way, aside from that touchdown drive where he kept hitting Garrett Wilson on third down. Um, and I just thought the Niners defense was really, really lights out. I thought Malik Collins against the run was just impossible to move, it seemed like. I thought Leonard Floyd had a nice game. Fred Warner, I mean, I texted the group chat with Kyle and Nick Wagner, our favorite cast member at ESPN. Like Fred Warner seemed to me in the first half like the best guy in the field for either team, just flying around. Um, and yeah, Greg points out in the chat, Isaac Yadam, Ambry Thomas. It's greater than Ambry Thomas. I think that's a pretty fair assessment, given that Yadam had a pretty nice play on that fourth down incompletion that kind of sealed it. So I think this is a very promising win for the 49ers. Shout out to Kevin Jones who asks, was this a Shanahan masterclass of a game? Yes and no. I mean, it was a really impressive coaching performance from the standpoint of, okay, you lose Christian McCaffrey, whether that was you knew Friday or you knew Monday. Regardless, it's a tough thing to do to try to replace Christian McCaffrey. But to Shanahan's credit, they identified a guy in Jordan Mason, and he came through for them in a really big way. And I had questions about Mason in terms of, I knew he could be a downhill between the tackles guy. I knew he could, look really good in the preseason. I didn't know if he could be a bell cow back in a scenario where you need him to get, 20 plus carries. And Jordan Mason came through in flying colors. 28 attempts. He said after the game, he told Christian he didn't know how he does it, how he gets all those touches and lasts a full game. And they were saying on the broadcast that Mason hadn't had 28 carries in a game since high school, which is pretty wild to think about. You're on Monday Night Football. The biggest guy you'll face, maybe there's a 300-pound guy on a high school team, one or two guys. There aren't any, 230, 240-pound linebackers who run 4.6s coming in and colliding with you, right? It's a little bit more difficult of a challenge getting every carry in an NFL game. But no, it's impossible not to be impressed with Jordan Mason, and it's not to be impossible. It's impossible not to be impressed with what Kyle Shanahan did in the sense of, all right, we're not going to have the reigning offensive player of the year who accounted for 2,000 total yards, and we're going to run for 38 times, and you're not going to be able to stop us. And it's also a credit to the offensive line. I thought Dominic Pooney looked really good. I'm feeling better and better about my early on take that said Dominic Pooney is the 49ers' second best offensive lineman. That's not exactly the highest bar, right? Because previously before him was probably Aaron Banks, who I saw Matt Barrows, friend of the show, report that Aaron Banks got kicked in the calf and was a little bit sore. We'll see how that goes. But I think Dominic Pooney, I don't know, if he's a Pro Bowler, if he's an All-Pro. That's way too lofty and it's way too early to say. But all the signs you want to see from a rookie who's thrust into a starting role in week one, you're seeing everything you want to see from Dominic Pooney against, like how many times did they call Quinnen Williams' name on the broadcast tonight? Right? Like coming in, that was a major concern. What's Dominic Pooney and Jake Brendel, what are those guys going to look like against Quinnen Williams in a game that matters? Because, Dominic Pooney can look great in a preseason game, but that doesn't really matter because how many starters is he actually going against? And how hard are those guys going to play against him, right? But Quinnen Williams on Monday Night Football in a game that matters, and the 49ers just ran it right down the Jets' throat. So the signs are positive. The Niners basically doubled up the Jets for the majority of the game with the, I'm not going to do the math and take away the yardage totals from the Jets' final drive when they went down and scored a touchdown. That was largely meaningless. But basically the Niners numbers better than the Jets, like 2-1, basically across the board. The Niners had 401 total yards. The Jets had just 266. I would assume with what 50 or 60 of those yards coming on the last drive. Time of possession, Niners 38 minutes 40 seconds. Jets 21 minutes 20 seconds, almost double. Um, the one area I think you could be concerned is maybe third down efficiency from the defense. Um, but that being said, I mean, the Jets converted 6 of 10. 3 of those came on one drive. You look at the Jets' possessions, the Jets on their first 6 possessions, so in the entire first half, they had one drive where they got a first down, and it was that touchdown drive where they kept going to Garrett Wilson on third down. So another guy being talked about in the chat here on YouTube as we're live. Nick Sorensen, man. Nick Sorensen, hell of a debut. And, it looks like him and Brandon Staley early on against the Jets team that I think it's fair to say might have been a little bit overrated from a weapons perspective. I think Breece Hall is really good. I think Garrett Wilson is obviously really, really good. They might be lacking elsewhere. And I know Allen Lazard had a couple touchdown passes. The last one didn't really count. The other one came on a broken play. The game was, largely over anyway. It looked like a pretty simple coverage bust. Somebody miscommunicated between Diamador Lenore in the slot and Jair Brown at safety, but I didn't come out of that game feeling like, oh, Allen Lazard's going to be a problem just because he scored a couple touchdowns. But still, about as good of a performance as you can expect from a defense playing with a new coordinator. That lost Eric Armstead, right? That lost Cleveland Ferrell. And I'm not saying Cleveland Ferrell is a huge loss for this team, but there were legitimate questions about the depth along the defensive line. And they didn't even have Yetur Gross-Matos tonight, who's been dealing with an injury. So things you can quibble with. Let's talk about maybe some of the things that weren't so awesome about Monday night's game. First, I think the first quarter, especially when the Jets took the lead, just felt very uncomfortable, right? We're not used to Kyle Shanahan's teams starting games off slowly. Usually the scripted plays are some of the most efficient, most fun to watch plays of any 49ers game, right? If you're a 49ers fan and you watch Kyle Shanahan's offenses, you need to be in your seat when the game starts because they're going to rip off a bunch of plays that complement each other that Kyle Shanahan's had in the bank for, 5 days at this point. Play action, runs, misdirection, routes, guys just getting wide open because Kyle Shanahan is taking advantage of tendencies and doing things that his offense hasn't put on tape. But the Niners go 3 and out. And Fred Warner forces a fumble. They don't get a first down. They don't get a touchdown. They have to settle for a field goal. Brandon Ayuk drops a pass on a slant. It was a pretty good play by Sauce Gardner, but that's probably a play Brandon Ayuk makes last year, right? Brandon Ayuk drops a pass in the end zone on a absolute dime from Brock Purdy at the end of the second quarter. And, frankly, it's the easiest thing in the world to say, hey, man, go to training camp and get your reps in a training camp and you'll catch that football. I actually think there's merit to it in the sense that, the last couple of years when you went to 49ers training camp, Brandon Ayuk was quite easily one of the best players on the field. And I know that was true last year. And I know it was true for Christian McCaffrey too. And it just so happened that both guys had career years, arguably. Not arguably in Ayuk's case, but arguably in McCaffrey's case. So you have a situation where Brandon Ayuk is sitting on a contract offer for 2 weeks, whatever it is, 2.5 weeks, ends up taking it, misses the entirety of training camp, gets 4 practices in, and frankly, he looks rusty. He just does. And it's not even necessarily about the dropped passes, which are obviously a huge part of it. But he didn't look as sharp. He didn't look as fluid. He didn't look as last year, even when Brandon Ayuk isn't catching passes, there will be film junkies, tweeting out video on X, formerly Twitter, Brandon Ayuk like breaking dudes' ankles all the time, right? And I haven't watched the tape yet, but it just didn't feel like Brandon Ayuk was that guy tonight. At one point, the Niners completed just one of 4 targets to him. He finished with 2 catches on 5 targets for 28 yards. Um, so it's not great, but the 49ers still win by double digits, which speaks to just sort of what this team is at this point. Trent Williams looked good. Trent Williams is going to be Trent Williams, and I thought he was good, save for there was one running play in the red zone. I want to say it was, I think it was in the first half. Forget exactly when it was. Trent just got beat, and the guy made a tackle for loss on Jordan Mason near the goal line. Pretty sure the Niners scored that game anyway, or on that drive anyway. Um, but no, Trent seems fine. He had to go in and get an IV. Obviously, if you're a Niners fan and you see Trent Williams walking in the locker room, it's not a sight you ever want to see. But fortunately, it was just an IV. Trent Williams was dehydrated. He's one of us. That's the most relatable Trent Williams is ever going to be. Being dehydrated, being a little tired. Otherwise, he's a superhuman athlete who does absurd things on the football field. And I feel pretty confident that we are going to see Trent Williams back to all-pro form in due order. Again, not even that he played poorly. It's just, he talked about after the game, like there's very clearly some rust, and he's not anywhere near football shape. Brock Purdy. Let's have a Brock Purdy conversation. 19 of 29, 65.5%, 231 yards, 8 yards per attempt, which is still efficient. Anything over 7.5 is generally pretty good. 8 is just fine. Didn't get in the end zone, or at least didn't have a touchdown pass. Would have if Brandon Ayuk didn't drop that perfectly thrown ball. I'm kind of to the point, and it's early, but I'm kind of to the point where I just expect Brock Purdy to just be really solid. And in a game where you run the ball 38 times and you do it for 180 yards on the ground, and you don't really have to pass the ball a lot, all you really ask for is your quarterback to be efficient. And I think he would have been more efficient had Brandon Ayuk had more practice time. Juwan Jennings in and out of the game, but still led the 49ers in receiving. 5 catches on 5 targets. Great throw to Kyle Juszczyk. Maybe it was a little behind him, or maybe Juszczyk chopped his steps a little too much. But his best throw of the game was the play to Ayuk that he dropped. That was an absolute dime, and kind of a clutch situation because it was the end of the first half. I believe it was still a relatively close game. Yeah, it was 17-13 at that point. So it was still a 1-score game when he made that clutch throw to Ayuk. So I am to the point where I just kind of expect Brock Purdy to be fine. He had a nice play with his legs, and I think it was an 11-yard run. On one of the Niners touchdown drives, I think the Deebo Samuel one, they overcame some penalties, which is obviously a really good sign. The holding call on Deebo Samuel at like the 5-yard line or whatever that was on Jordan Mason's touchdown, we're doing a little bit too much, referee, in that case, right? Like, Mr. Referee, we don't have to call that one. Like, I think it was Sauce Gardner. That dude's not stopping Jordan Mason in that scenario. Sorry. Sauce Gardner, probably the best corner in the league. If not the best, one of the best too. All pro. Elite coverage player. Jordan Mason with a full head of steam going heads up against Sauce Gardner, who looks like he weighs 185 pounds. I think Jordan Mason's running through that tackle and still getting to the end zone. Not a necessary flag to throw there. Looked a lot like a hip drop tackle on the play that hurt Juwan Jennings' ankle. The NFL says it's outlawing that for that exact reason. Thought that probably deserved a flag. I think there was a play or two earlier. Kyle Juszczyk had an obvious block in the back on a big 49ers play that happened right in front of the officials that they missed. So maybe not the most cleanly officiated game. I think that's the last thing I'm going to say about officiating because nobody cares. But yeah, 49ers got back to bully ball. I don't know if I said this Robert Saleh quote, but I wrote it down because I wanted to point it out. Watched his post-game press conference. He said that's a championship outfit and they introduced us to some championship football. To me, that's a big statement, right? Because so much, if not the entirety of the conversation around the Niners was, oh man, Brandon Ayuk contract situation, Trent Williams contract situation. These guys aren't practicing. The vibes are bad. I think a lot of people watching the 49ers came into this year making comparisons to the 2014 team, the team that went to three straight conference championships with Jim Harbaugh and that Super Bowl appearance in after the 2012 season. And then 2014 was just kind of an abject disaster, right? And people thought because of the Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams situations and even Christian McCaffrey's injury that the 49ers were going to maybe back into this season, get off to a slow start, and things might not go as well. I mean, if you watch football this weekend, I think it's pretty clear that the Chiefs and Niners are still the two best teams, at least right now. That's what it feels like. And the fact that the Niners can win a game comfortably, a game where a late touchdown made it, we can do some math, a late touchdown made it a 13-point game. The 49ers won that comfortably without Christian McCaffrey, with Brandon Ayuk only contributing 2 catches, with Trent Williams not being nearly himself. They win that game that comfortably against a team a lot of people think could win the AFC East, and maybe the Jets still could. I think the Jets are better than how they played tonight. I think there was a buzzsaw element to that 49ers team. But I think the Niners silenced a lot of that conversation. And look, maybe Brandon Ayuk doesn't look the same all year. And maybe Brandon Ayuk has some bigger drops and some bigger moments, and it costs the 49ers some wins. If that happens, then the conversation will certainly kick back into gear. But for now, man, the 49ers look really sharp. With the exception of Brandon Ayuk, and, obviously you want to have Christian McCaffrey. Otherwise, Niners look sharp. They look dialed. Like there wasn't this Super Bowl hangover element that a lot of people had alluded to. And to be honest, I don't even think that's bad logic, like to have those questions about the Niners, right? We see NFL championship windows open and close all the time. So I don't think it's crazy to have the conversation of, man, maybe this window is going to close, because it's going to close at some point, right? Like it closed with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. Obviously it lasted forever. The 80s, 90s Niners championship window closed post Jeff Garcia, and that whole, like, the Niners aren't going to be arguably the best team in the conference forever. But the fact everything happened the way it did in August and everything felt so disjointed and so uncertain going into the season, and then to put up a performance like that against a really talented Jets team, I think it's just really impressive. So we'll end on that. Man, just rambled for almost half an hour. I appreciate you guys hanging with me on YouTube, and anybody who listened to this full episode without Kyle, who's big timing me. He's on 95.7, doing post game in San Francisco. Probably doing a bang up job as always. But yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please, 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 if you have the ability to come to Cooperage on Saturday, October 12th, the weekend after the 49ers play in Seattle on Thursday night, come hang out with us. Drink some beer with us. It's going to be a great time. It'll be our 4th show in a row. 707 Faithfuls will have a merch booth there. Shout out to them. Gonna work on some guests. We're working. We're grinding. We're hitting some people on the hip, trying to get them to show up. And we're gonna have some auction items. So it'll be a really, really fun time. If you haven't been before, it's a very fun time. Good conversation. Gets a little bit more loose than these podcasts because, we've had a few. We do not publish the audio, mainly because we kind of want the event to feel a little bit exclusive, right? And we want to feel like we can let our hair down and say some things a little bit without, worrying about going viral or being accused of being hot take artists or whatever. So shout out to Cooperage, man. I think it's our 4th year in a row they're sponsoring us. Obviously, you see the hat. We really, really appreciate Cooperage for all the support over the years. We obviously support or appreciate Lamb Chops also for the support, and Prize Picks for the support as well. Check out Prize Picks, promo code Candlestick with them. And Kyle and I will be back recording this Monday night. We'll be back Tuesday night with an episode where him and I can have further conversation, so it's not just me ranting at you guys. But I appreciate you guys for listening. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Candlestick Chronicles podcast. Hit the notification bell, hit the like button, leave comments, interact with us. Follow us on X, formerly Twitter. It's at CandleCron. We cannot fit Candlestick Chronicles into a handle on X, so it's CandleCron. If you haven't found us there, find us. Check us out. No stick, no ickles. If you know, you know. And shout out to Nate Thomas. Hashtag no stickles. No stick, no ickles is so back. We appreciate you, Nate. We'll talk to you guys later in the week. I appreciate you for rocking with me. And everybody, enjoy the night and have a good rest of your week.